My name is Lydia, and at 62 I never imagined I'd be fighting for my dignity in a lawyer's office just 2 weeks after burying Robert, my husband of 40 years. As a retired nurse from Boston, I'd spent my life caring for others, including Robert, throughout his battle with cancer. But nothing prepared me for the moment. My only daughter, Natalie, stood up during the will reading and told me to leave, saying it was between her and her mother-in-law. She had no idea what was coming next, or how her father's final decisions would change everything. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and subscribe now to hear how a mother reclaimed her self-worth after the ultimate betrayal from her own daughter. I was born and raised in a working-class neighborhood in South Boston, the daughter of a factory worker and a school secretary. From an early age, I knew I wanted to help people, which led me to nursing school on a partial scholarship. I worked evenings at a diner to cover the rest of my expenses, often studying late into the night after my shifts ended. Those early years taught me the value of hard work and perseverance, lessons I would carry throughout my life. I met Robert during my clinical rotation at Massachusetts General Hospital in 1981. He was there visiting a friend who had been in a minor car accident, and he accidentally walked into the wrong room, mine. Instead of being embarrassed, he smiled and asked if I knew where room 302 was. I not only gave him directions, but ended up walking him there during my break. By the time we reached his friend's room, he had asked for my phone number. Robert wasn't what anyone would call wealthy then. He had just started his real estate business, working out of a tiny office with second-hand furniture and big dreams. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant, where he admitted he had saved up specifically to take me somewhere nice. I was touched by his honesty and ambition, but what really captivated me was his integrity. In a business often associated with cutting corners, Robert was determined to succeed through hard work and ethical practices. We married 18 months later, in a modest ceremony with close family and friends. Our first home was a small fixer-upper that Robert had acquired through his business, a 2-bedroom house with outdated wallpaper and creaky floors that we spent weekends renovating together. Those were some of my favorite memories, Robert teaching me how to sand floors while I taught him how to cook something other than spaghetti. For the first 5 years of our marriage, we tried to have children. Each negative pregnancy test was a quiet heartbreak we weathered together. After 3 miscarriages, we started to accept that perhaps children weren't in our future. Robert threw himself into growing his business, while I advanced in my nursing career, specializing in pediatric care, perhaps my way of nurturing when I couldn't have a child of my own. Then, when we had almost given up hope, I became pregnant with Natalie. The pregnancy was difficult with bed rest for the final trimester, but Robert was there every step of the way. He would come home from work and read real estate journals aloud, to my growing belly joking that our child would be a property mogul before kindergarten. When Natalie was finally born, healthy and perfect with Robert's eyes and my stubborn chin, it felt like every struggle had been worthwhile. Those early years with Natalie were precious beyond measure. Robert would race home from work to give her baths, insisting on taking night feedings despite his long workdays. As his business began to flourish, he remained determined that our daughter would understand the value of hard work just as we did. When Natalie was 5 and asked why we couldn't move to a bigger house like her friend Samantha's, Robert sat her down and explained that we were saving money to make sure she could go to college someday. Even at that young age, she seemed to understand. By the time Natalie was 10, Robert's company had expanded significantly. We moved to a larger home in a better school district, but Robert insisted on keeping things modest, despite our improving finances. "I don't want her growing up thinking money falls from the sky," he would say. We established an allowance system for Natalie tied to chores and grades, teaching her to save portions of what she earned. As Natalie entered her teenage years, I began to notice subtle changes in her attitude. The gratitude and understanding she had shown as a child were gradually replaced by comparisons to friends who had more. When she was 15, she threw a fit because we wouldn't buy her a car for her 16th birthday, 6 months away. "Everyone at school will have one except me," she cried, slamming her bedroom door. Robert was deeply troubled by these incidents. Late at night, after Natalie had gone to bed, He would express his concerns about her growing materialism. Where did we go wrong, Lydia? We tried so hard to teach her what really matters. I often found myself in the middle defending Natalie as going through a phase while privately sharing his worries. When Robert's mother Eleanor needed a place to live after his father passed away, we welcomed her into our home without hesitation. Eleanor was a former librarian with a gentle spirit and sharp mind. At first, Natalie enjoyed having her grandmother around, especially when Eleanor would tell stories about Robert's childhood mischief. But as Natalie moved through high school and into college, she became increasingly dismissive of Eleanor, seeing her as an inconvenience rather than family. Eleanor and I, however, formed a deep bond. We shared a love of classic literature and gardening, often spending Sunday afternoons tending to the flower beds, while discussing everything from Jane Austen to current politics. When I had to work long hospital shifts, Eleanor would have dinner waiting, never making me feel guilty for my career. "Women supporting women," she would say with a wink, "is how we've survived all these centuries." As Robert's business continued to grow, so did our financial security, though you wouldn't necessarily know it from our lifestyle. Robert believed in comfortable living, but avoided ostentation. We traveled more established college funds for Natalie and increased our charitable giving, particularly to organizations supporting education for underprivileged children. Robert established a foundation that provided scholarships for students who, like us, came from working-class backgrounds with big dreams. Natalie graduated from an expensive private university with a business degree largely paid for by her college fund and Robert's successful investments. We were incredibly proud of her accomplishments, but concerned when she immediately gravitated toward the most prestigious, high-paying jobs, without seeming to consider whether the work itself was meaningful. Robert tried to talk with her about finding purpose beyond a paycheck, but these conversations usually ended with Natalie rolling her eyes and saying, "Times have changed, Dad." It was at a charity gala for Robert's foundation that Natalie met William, a charismatic hedge fund manager, 10 years her senior. Their whirlwind romance moved quickly, too quickly for Robert's comfort. "There's something about him I don't trust," he confided to me one night. "The way he talks about money like it's the only thing that matters." Despite Robert's reservations, Natalie and William married at an extravagant ceremony that cost more than our first house. William's family had old money and connections that seemed to mesmerize Natalie. After the wedding, our time with her became increasingly limited. Holidays were split between families, with William's clearly taking precedence. When they did visit, conversation revolved around acquisitions, their new vacation home in the Hamptons, William's vintage car collection, the exclusive clubs they had joined. Family gatherings became tense affairs with subtle digs about our quaint lifestyle and Eleanor's outdated perspectives. I would catch Robert watching Natalie with a sadness in his eyes that broke my heart. After one particularly strained Christmas dinner, where William spent the entire time on his phone, except when discussing investments, Robert retreated to his study. I found him looking at old photographs of Natalie as a child. "I don't recognize her anymore, Lydia," he said quietly. "What happened to that little girl who was thrilled with a $20 bill in her birthday card, because she'd earned it by helping me clean the garage?" I had no answer that would ease his pain. We were losing our daughter to a world of material excess that seemed to be hollowing her out from the inside, replacing her warmth with a cold shininess that reflected everyone around her, but revealed nothing of herself. Our lives took an unexpected turn when Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. What began as occasional back pain and fatigue was revealed to be stage 3 cancer with a guarded prognosis. The day we received the diagnosis, I watched the color drain from Robert's face, not from fear for himself, but from the realization he might not have as much time as he thought to set things right with Natalie. I took early retirement from my nursing position to become Robert's full-time caregiver. After 35 years of caring for others' loved ones, I would now dedicate myself entirely to my own. Eleanor, though 84 and dealing with arthritis and heart problems, insisted on helping however she could. She would sit with Robert during my grocery runs, reading to him from his favorite historical biographies, or simply holding his hand in comfortable silence. Natalie's response to her father's illness was painfully limited. She sent expensive flower arrangements and called occasionally, but her visits were infrequent and brief. When she did come, she seemed uncomfortable with the realities of her father's declining health, the weight loss, the medical equipment, his increasing fatigue. She would perch on the edge of the couch, checking her watch, and finding reasons to cut visits short. "She's busy with work, that's all," Robert would say after she left, making excuses we both knew were hollow. In truth, Natalie had become a stranger who resembled our daughter only in appearance. Thanksgiving that year marked a turning point. Robert had finished a round of chemotherapy that left him weaker than usual, but determined to have a proper family holiday. Eleanor and I spent 2 days making Robert's favourite dishes and setting the table with the good china that had belonged to his grandmother. Natalie and William were scheduled to arrive at 3 in the afternoon, but texted at the last minute that they would be late. They finally appeared at 5:30, by which time the food had been reheated twice, and Robert, exhausted from waiting, had needed to lie down for a while. During dinner, William dominated the conversation with stories about their recent trip to Monaco and his firm's latest high-profile client. Robert attempted several times to engage Natalie in more personal conversation, asking about her work, her friends, even her plans for Christmas. But she deflected each question with minimal responses, before turning attention back to William. After the meal, as Eleanor and I cleared the table, I overheard Natalie and William talking in low voices in the hallway, not realizing Robert had gone to his study nearby. "The house is actually in a prime location," William was saying. "Properly marketed, it could sell for at least twice what they paid for it. The neighborhood has completely transformed." "I know," Natalie replied. "But Dad would never consider selling. He's too sentimental about this place." "Well, eventually decisions about the property won't be his to make," William said, his tone making the implication clear. "We should talk to our estate planner again about inheritance tax strategies." I froze in the kitchen, plate in hand, as I realized they were discussing Robert's death and their plans for his assets as if it were a business transaction. What made it worse was knowing Robert could hear every word from his study. That night, after our guests had departed with promises to visit again soon, that rang hollow, I found Robert sitting alone in the dark of our bedroom. When I turned on the lamp, I could see he had been crying, something I had rarely witnessed in our 40 years together. "I've failed her, Lydia," he said, his voice breaking. "Somehow I raised a daughter who can stand in my home while I'm fighting for my life and calculate the real estate value of her inheritance." I held him as he spoke of his disappointment and heartbreak. Then, wiping his eyes, he straightened his shoulders with a resolve I recognized from the many challenges we had faced together. "I need to make some changes to my will," he said firmly. "Would you call Michael tomorrow and ask him to come here? I don't have the strength to go to his office." Michael Harrison had been Robert's attorney and friend for 30 years. He arrived the next afternoon, spending several hours closeted with Robert in his study, while I kept Eleanor company in the kitchen, both of us wondering what decisions were being made behind that closed door. When Michael left, Robert seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. "I'm not ready to discuss it yet," he told me when I gently inquired. "But I've done what needs to be done. What's fair?" Over the next few months, as Robert's condition deteriorated, Natalie suddenly became more attentive. Her calls increased in frequency, and she began stopping by the house on her way home from work. These visits always included questions that seemed innocuous but carried underlying purpose. Had Dad updated his will since the diagnosis? Was he still involved in business decisions? Was the house still in both our names? William became a more frequent presence as well, offering unsolicited investment advice to Robert and commenting on the wasted potential of our property. He brought stacks of financial magazines and investment prospectuses that Robert politely accepted but never opened. One afternoon, I returned from picking up Robert's prescriptions to find Eleanor and Natalie in a heated argument. Eleanor, despite her usual gentle demeanor, was standing her ground with flashing eyes. "Your father is still very much alive," she was saying, "and this constant talk of what happens after, is not only inappropriate but deeply hurtful. Natalie's face was flushed with anger. I'm being practical, Grandma. Someone has to think about these things. Mum is too emotional to handle the financial realities. Your mother has handled more realities than you could imagine, Eleanor replied. And she's done it with grace and love, not calculation. The argument ended abruptly when they noticed me in the doorway. Natalie left shortly after claiming a work emergency. Eleanor, shaking with emotion, confided that Natalie had been suggesting it might be more practical for Eleanor to consider an assisted living facility after Robert's passing, as the house would likely be sold. She speaks as if I'm a piece of furniture to be relocated, Eleanor said, tears in her eyes. As if the home I've shared with you and Robert for 15 years means nothing. The emotional toll of Robert's illness was immense, but these family tensions added a layer of stress that made everything harder. I found myself not only providing physical care to Robert and supporting Eleanor, but also trying to manage Natalie's increasing demands for information and involvement in financial matters. Through it all, Robert maintained a quiet dignity. He never confronted Natalie about her behavior, though I knew he was acutely aware of it. Instead, he spent his remaining energy on meaningful conversations with me, with Eleanor, and with the few close friends who regularly visited. He finalized donations to his foundation, wrote letters to be delivered after his passing, and even recorded video messages on his iPad with Michael's assistance. In his final weeks, Robert became increasingly peaceful, as if he had resolved whatever internal struggles he had been facing. One night, as I sat beside his bed, holding his hand, he looked at me with clear eyes and said, I want you to know that I've taken care of everything, Lydia. When the time comes, stay strong and remember what truly matters. I trust you to understand why I've done what I've done. I didn't fully comprehend his meaning then, but I assured him of my love and support, as I had throughout our marriage. 3 days later, Robert slipped away quietly in his sleep, my hand still in his, Eleanor dozing in the chair on his other side. Our family circle diminished, but unbroken. The man who had started with nothing, built a successful business based on integrity, and never forgot the value of hard work and compassion, was gone. But his legacy, as I would soon discover, was carefully crafted to reflect the principles by which he had lived. The days following Robert's death passed in a blur of necessary activities and raw grief. After 40 years together, I found myself constantly turning to share thoughts with someone who was no longer there. A beautiful sunset, a memory triggered by a song on the radio, the simple observation that the coffee was particularly good that morning. Each realization that he was gone felt like losing him anew. Eleanor was my anchor during this time. Despite her age and her own grief at losing her son, she maintained a quiet strength that helped me navigate the immediate practicalities, the funeral home arrangements, the obituary, notifications to friends and family. We supported each other in the middle of the night when sleep was impossible, sharing tea and memories in the kitchen at 3 a.m. The funeral arrangements should have been simple. Robert had left clear instructions, a modest service at our local church, donations to his foundation in lieu of flowers, a celebration of life rather than a somber occasion. Play some jazz, he'd written in his instructions. Serve good wine, tell stories that make people laugh. Natalie, however, had other ideas. The day after Robert died, she arrived with a folder full of information about an exclusive funeral home that catered to Boston's elite families. She had already spoken with them about available dates and discussed upgrading to a mahogany casket with silk lining. Dad deserves the best, she insisted when I gently reminded her of Robert's wishes. What will people think if we do some bare-bones service? He was a successful businessman. Your father was clear about what he wanted, I replied, exhaustion making my voice sharper than intended. And he wanted simplicity and meaning, not an expensive showcase. The argument ended with Natalie storming out, only to return the next day with William and the funeral director from the high-end establishment, who began presenting options as if the decision had already been made. Too worn down to fight, I agreed to compromises that resulted in a service far more elaborate than Robert would have wanted, though I stood firm on having the memorial at our church rather than the funeral home's exclusive chapel. Throughout the planning, Eleanor remained a steadfast ally, quietly reinforcing my authority when Natalie tried to override decisions. "Your mother knows your father's wishes better than anyone," she would say firmly. "We need to respect that." The service itself was a strange mixture of the authentic and the performative. The church was filled with Robert's actual friends and colleagues, people who had known him for decades and genuinely mourned his loss, alongside business acquaintances Natalie had invited, who barely knew him but came out of professional courtesy. Natalie's grief, displayed prominently in the front pew, struck me as theatrical. She wept dramatically, at precisely the moments when the most eyes were upon her, yet I had not seen her shed a single tear in private. During the eulogy delivered by Robert's oldest friend, she and William whispered to each other, pausing occasionally to nod solemnly when they noticed others looking their way. What touched me deeply were the stories shared at the reception afterward. Robert's first employee, now a successful developer himself, described how Robert had paid his college tuition when his family couldn't afford it. The janitor from Robert's office building recalled how Robert knew his children's names and always asked about their school achievements. A young woman I'd never met approached me to explain that she was a recipient of Robert's Foundation scholarship and was now a pediatric nurse because of his generosity. These were the tributes that truly honored the man I had loved, not the expensive flower arrangements or the catered reception that Natalie had insisted upon. Throughout the day, I noticed how Natalie introduced me to business contacts she knew through Robert. "This is my father's wife, Lydia." She would say the phrasing a subtle but clear distinction from my mother. To Eleanor, she showed minimal attention, steering important contacts away from her grandmother, as if the elderly woman might say something embarrassing. The days immediately following the funeral brought little respite. While Eleanor and I tried to support each other through our grief, Natalie began a campaign of subtle pressure regarding next steps. Her calls and visits inevitably included questions about when we would meet with the attorney, whether I had thought about downsizing from such a large house, and suggestions that Eleanor might be safer in a facility with proper medical care. I found myself dreading her visits, which left me emotionally drained and increasingly anxious. Eleanor, perceiving my distress, would often intervene with well-timed interruptions when conversations became too pointed. "Lydia, didn't you say you needed help with that photo album today?" she would ask, giving me an excuse to end difficult interactions. 2 weeks after the funeral, a letter arrived from Michael Harrison's office, scheduling the official reading of Robert's will for the following Monday. Natalie called within an hour of what must have been her own notification. "I'm bringing our attorney, Gregory Phillips," she announced without preamble. "Will has worked with him for years. He'll make sure everything is handled properly." The implication that Michael, who had been Robert's trusted counsel for decades, might not handle things properly was not lost on me. "That's your choice, Natalie," I replied wearily. "But Michael has always had our family's best interests at heart." "It's not about heart, Mum," she said with exaggerated patience. "It's about ensuring the estate is managed correctly. There are tax implications, property considerations. Will and I need to protect our interests." Our interests. The phrase echoed in my mind long after we hung up. Not her father's wishes or the family's needs, but her and William's interests. The morning before the will reading, I found myself sitting at my vanity table looking at photographs of my life with Robert. Our wedding day with both of us laughing as cake frosting smeared on our noses. Natalie's birth. Robert's face a mixture of awe and terror as he held our daughter for the first time. Family vacations, house renovations, holidays, and ordinary moments that together formed the tapestry of our shared life. I selected several photos and placed them in my purse. Whatever happened at the reading, I wanted tangible reminders of what Robert and I had built together, a marriage founded on love, respect, and shared values. As I came downstairs, I found Eleanor waiting in the kitchen, dressed in a simple navy dress and her good pearl earrings. Though frailer since Robert's death, she carried herself with dignity. "Whatever happens today," she said, taking my hand, "remember that Robert always knew exactly what he was doing. He was meticulous in his planning in business and in personal matters. Her confidence steadied my nerves. I'm afraid of what this might do to my relationship with Natalie, I confessed. Things are already so strained. Eleanor's eyes, so like her son's, held a mixture of compassion and resolve. Relationships built on genuine love can weather difficult truths, she said. If there's real love there, you and Natalie will find your way back to each other whatever happens today. We arrived at Michael's office 15 minutes early. I was surprised to find several of Robert's business partners already in the reception area, along with his foundation director and 2 long-time employees. Michael had mentioned that various smaller bequests would be addressed, but I hadn't expected such a gathering. Natalie and William arrived last, accompanied by a sharp-featured man carrying an expensive leather briefcase, who I presumed was their attorney. Natalie kissed my cheek perfunctorily, nodded to Eleanor, and immediately engaged Michael's receptionist in a discussion about the attendees. "Why are all these people here?" I overheard her asking. "Shouldn't this be a private family matter first?" As we were ushered into the large conference room, I felt a growing sense of unease. Whatever Robert had planned, it was clearly more complex than I had anticipated. I took a seat next to Eleanor, drawing strength from her calm presence, as Michael prepared to reveal the final wishes of the man we had both loved so dearly. The conference room at Harrison and Associates exuded quiet prosperity, with its polished mahogany table leather chairs and tasteful artwork. Michael sat at the head of the table, surrounded by neat stacks of documents and a laptop. His assistant distributed water and notepads to each attendee before taking a seat in the corner with a stenography machine. "Thank you all for coming today." Michael began, his voice carrying the formal tone he reserved for professional settings, though his eyes conveyed personal sympathy when they met mine. "We are gathered to address the last will and testament of Robert James Thompson." He turned to a framed photograph of Robert on an easel beside him, a recent image showing him in his office smiling confidently. The sight of my husband looking healthy and vital compared to his final weeks sent a fresh wave of grief through me. "Before we begin, I want to express my personal condolences to the Thompson family. Robert was not only my client for 30 years, but a dear friend. His integrity in business and personal matters was unmatched." Natalie shifted impatiently in her seat. "We appreciate the sentiments, Mr. Harrison, but perhaps we could get to the relevant matters." Michael's expression didn't change, but I noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Crawford. As Robert would have wanted, we'll proceed efficiently." He opened a leather portfolio and began outlining the extent of Robert's estate, multiple properties, including our family home, commercial real estate holdings, his controlling interest in Thompson Development Group investment portfolios, and various personal assets. The total value, substantially more than even I had realized, caused a ripple of murmurs around the table. William leaned forward with undisguised interest, while Natalie's attorney began making rapid notes. "Before addressing the main distribution," Michael continued, "Robert has specified several individual bequests. What followed was a testament to Robert's thoughtfulness and generosity. His executive assistant of 20 years received a significant cash gift and guaranteed employment with Thompson Development Group for as long as she wished. His first employee, now a vice president, was gifted the small office building where they had started the company together. Several long-time staff members received generous financial packages. The foundation Robert had established received a substantial endowment to expand its scholarship program with specific directions for supporting nursing students in my honor. Robert's favorite charity, which provided housing for families of children receiving long-term medical care, received funding for a new facility. Throughout these announcements, I felt a complex mixture of pride in my husband's generosity and sadness that he wasn't here to see the impact of his gifts. Eleanor quietly passed me a tissue as Michael continued through the list of bequests. When he came to Eleanor's portion, Michael's voice softened slightly. "To my mother, Eleanor Thompson, whose wisdom and strength have guided me throughout my life, I leave the sum of $200,000, my collection of first edition books, which she helped inspire a love of literature, and the diamond earrings that belonged to my grandmother, which she has admired since I first brought Lydia home to meet my family. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the small jewelry box Michael's assistant handed her. The gesture was so like Robert, remembering a comment Eleanor had made decades ago about those earrings. As Michael prepared to address the main distribution of assets, Natalie suddenly stood up. She smoothed her designer dress and turned to me with what appeared to be a sympathetic smile, but didn't reach her eyes. "You can leave now, Mum," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "This is between me and my mother-in-law. We all know Dad's estate goes to family." The room fell silent. William nodded in agreement and actually pulled out the chair beside me, as if helping me to exit. Their attorney adjusted his tie with a small smirk. I sat frozen, the dismissal like a physical blow. After 40 years of partnership with Robert, after caring for him through his illness, after building a life together, my own daughter was telling me I wasn't family enough to be present for this moment. Before I could respond, Eleanor's voice cut through the tension, quiet but firm. "Sit down, Lydia. You are family." Michael cleared his throat pointedly. "Mrs. Crawford, your mother is most certainly required to be here, as you'll understand momentarily. Please take your seat so we can continue." Natalie's confident expression faltered slightly. She glanced at her attorney, who nodded for her to sit down. "Now to the main distribution," Michael continued, opening a sealed envelope. "I'll read directly from Robert's will." He adjusted his reading glasses and began, "To my daughter Natalie, whom I have always loved, despite our differences, I leave the sum of $25,000, and my sincere hope that she will someday understand the values I tried to instill." A strangled sound came from Natalie's direction. Her face drained of colour as the modest bequest, essentially a token amount given the size of the estate, registered. "There must be some mistake," she interrupted. 25,000. That can't be right." Michael continued reading without acknowledging her outburst. "The remainder of my estate, including all properties, business interests and investments, I leave to my beloved wife Lydia, whose unwavering love and support made everything in my life possible." William's hand clamped down on Natalie's arm as she half rose from her seat again. Their attorney was frantically flipping through his notes. Additionally, Michael read, "I establish a trust for the ongoing care and security of my mother, Eleanor Thompson, to be administered by Lydia, according to the guidelines outlined in Appendix C." He turned the page. "Regarding our family home, it is my explicit wish that the property never be sold, as long as Lydia or my mother wish to reside there. While Lydia has full discretion regarding all other assets, this property should remain as their home for as long as they desire." Natalie's shock had transformed into fury. She stood fully now, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. "This is outrageous." He wasn't thinking clearly. The cancer medications, the pain, he wasn't of sound mind. Mom clearly manipulated him when he was vulnerable. She continued, pointing at me accusingly. "Anyone can see that. $25,000. After everything we've done, this will not stand." William was pulling at her arm, hissing something in her ear, while their attorney attempted to regain professional composure. "Mr. Harrison," the attorney interjected smoothly, "my clients have serious concerns about Mr. Thompson's mental capacity at the time this will was executed. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before proceeding further." Michael's expression remained impassive. I anticipated this response, as did Robert. He turned to his laptop and pressed a few keys. The large screen on the conference room wall illuminated with Robert's face, a video recording. "Hello, everyone," Robert began, looking directly into the camera. He was clearly ill, but alert, his eyes clear and focused. "If you're watching this, then Michael is reading my will, and Natalie is probably questioning my mental capacity or suggesting undue influence." A small, sad smile crossed his face. "I know my daughter well." He shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly. "I am recording this statement 3 months before my anticipated death in the presence of my attorney, Michael Harrison, and Dr. James Wilson, my treating physician, who will attest to my sound mind and absence of pain medication today. I want to explain the decisions I've made regarding my estate. The camera panned briefly to show both men mentioned, then returned to Robert. Natalie, I have loved you from the moment you were born. Your mother and I tried to raise you to understand that a meaningful life isn't measured by possessions or status. Somewhere along the way, you lost sight of that truth. His voice remained gentle, but his words were direct. I've watched you become increasingly focused on wealth and appearances, especially since your marriage. The daughter who once donated half her allowance to animal shelters now calculates the real estate value of her parents' home while her father is dying. I glanced at Natalie, whose face had gone from angry to stunned. Robert had obviously overheard that conversation with William during their Thanksgiving visit. My decision to leave the bulk of my estate to your mother isn't meant as punishment, Robert continued. It's recognition of our 40-year partnership and absolute trust in her judgment. Lydia will ensure that my mother is cared for with dignity. She will manage the foundation with compassion. And I know that if you ever truly need help, not for luxury but for necessity, she would never turn you away. He paused, taking a sip of water. I considered creating trusts with restrictions and conditions, but that would suggest I still need to parent you from beyond the grave. You're 36 years old, Natalie. The values either took root or they didn't. The $25,000 is not an arbitrary amount. It's exactly what I started with after college, the loan from my great-uncle that I used to launch my business. You have advantages. I never had education connections, the Crawford family resources. If you want more, build it yourself as I did. The recording continued with Robert addressing a few specific legal matters, concluding with a final stipulation. If any beneficiary contests this will or attempts to challenge its validity, their inheritance shall be reduced to $1. As the video ended, the conference room remained silent. Natalie's face had crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Genuine ones this time, I thought. William was staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Their attorney was whispering urgently in his ear. Michael closed his portfolio. Are there any questions about the terms as presented? Natalie's attorney stood. My clients need time to review these unexpected provisions. We reserve all rights to reduce their inheritance to $1. Michael interrupted, his tone mild, but his meaning clear. As you wish. The contestation clause was quite explicit. William pulled Natalie from her chair. We're leaving. Now. His face was flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. As they gathered their belongings, he avoided eye contact with everyone in the room. At the door, Natalie turned back. Her tear-streaked face held a mixture of hurt and rage as she looked directly at me. This isn't over, she said, her voice breaking. You turned him against me. You won't get away with this. After they departed, Michael addressed the remaining attendees, concluding the formal reading and arranging for individual meetings regarding specific bequests. As people filed out, many stopped to offer condolences and kind words. Robert's first employee clasped my hands in his. Robert made the right choice, he said quietly. He always did. When only Eleanor, Michael, and I remained, I finally allowed my composure to crack. I had no idea he was planning this. I said, my voice shaking. He never told me. He didn't want to burden you with Natalie's inevitable reaction while you were caring for him, Michael explained. But he was very clear about his wishes. He hesitated. There's more we need to discuss privately, Lydia. Things Robert wanted me to share with you after the initial reading. Eleanor touched my arm gently. Robert trusted you completely, she said. Not just with his estate, but with his legacy, with what he truly valued. As we prepared to leave, Michael handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. He asked me to give you this afterward. Read it when you're ready. The letter felt heavy in my hands. One final message from the man who had been my partner, my best friend, my heart's compass for 40 years. Whatever challenges lay ahead with Natalie, I would face them carrying Robert's last words and the trust he had placed in me. The drive home from Michael's office passed in contemplative silence. Eleanor gazed out the window, lost in her own thoughts, while I tried to process the events of the morning. Robert's decision to leave almost everything to me rather than Natalie had clearly been carefully considered, but the aftermath would be complicated and painful. As we turned onto our street, I noticed a familiar car in our driveway, Natalie's silver luxury sedan. She was standing beside it, arms crossed, clearly waiting for us. "Oh dear," Eleanor murmured. "I was hoping we might have a little peace before this confrontation." I parked on the street rather than pulling into the driveway, giving us a moment to prepare. "Do you want to go in through the back? You don't need to be part of this." Eleanor patted my hand. "We face things together in this family, Lydia. The real family." As we approached, I could see Natalie had been crying. Her makeup was smeared, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. William was notably absent. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded as soon as we were within earshot. "My own mother stealing my inheritance." Our elderly neighbour, Mr. Abernathy, was working in his front garden and looked up at her raised voice. I took a deep breath, determined to keep the situation from escalating into a public scene. "Let's talk inside," I suggested, moving toward the front door. "No," Natalie blocked my path. "I want answers now. What did you say to Dad to turn him against me? What lies did you tell while he was drugged and vulnerable?" Eleanor stepped forward, her small frame somehow imposing despite her age. "Your father was of completely sound mind, Natalie, and your mother had nothing to do with his decisions." "Stay out of this," Natalie snapped. "You've always taken her side. You're probably thrilled with how this turned out. You get to keep living here while I get nothing." By now, the Johnsons from across the street had come outside ostensibly to collect their mail, but clearly monitoring the situation. Mrs. Johnson, who had known our family for decades, began walking slowly toward us. "Everything all right, Lydia?" she called. "We're fine, Margaret," I replied, though we were anything but. "Just a family discussion." Natalie's face flushed deeper. "Family? Is that what you call it when you manipulate a dying man to cut out his only daughter? When you steal what should rightfully be mine?" "Your father made his own decisions," I said quietly. "I didn't even know the contents of his will until today." "Convenient," she scoffed. "You expect me to believe that, after 40 years of marriage, he just happened to leave you everything without discussing it?" The truth was that Robert and I had always maintained a policy of transparency about our finances, with one exception: his final will. His insistence on handling it privately had seemed unusual at the time, but I had respected his wishes, assuming he wanted to spare me difficult conversations during his illness. "Believe what you want, Natalie," I said, suddenly feeling the weight of grief and stress catching up with me. "But this display isn't going to change anything. If you want to have a rational conversation, we can do that tomorrow when everyone has had time to cool down." "This isn't over," she hissed, echoing her parting words from the attorney's office. "I'm going to contest the will. I'm going to tell everyone how you manipulated Dad when he was weak, how you turned him against his own daughter." Eleanor, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Your father saw exactly who you've become, Natalie. No one needed to tell him anything." Natalie's expression twisted with fury. "So now the truth comes out. You both resented my success, my lifestyle. You were jealous that William and I have what you never could." The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. "Jealous, Natalie, your father and I could have lived in a mansion, driven expensive cars, joined the country club. We chose not to because those things weren't important to us." "Right," she sneered. "You chose to live like this. That's why you're so desperate to hang on to Dad's money now." The Abernathys and the Johnsons had moved closer, their protective presence a silent support. Mr. Johnson, a retired judge, cleared his throat. "Young lady, I've known your parents for 30 years. They are the most honest, generous people I've ever met. Whatever Robert decided, you can be sure it was fair." Natalie glared at him. "Stay out of this. You know nothing about our family matters." "We know enough," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. "We saw how your mother cared for your father every day during his illness. We saw how rarely you visited. Actions speak louder than words, dear." Seeing that the neighborhood support was firmly on our side, Natalie retreated slightly. "This isn't the end," she said, getting back into her car. "Enjoy the house while you can. My lawyers will be in touch." As she drove away, tires squealing slightly, Eleanor sagged against me. The confrontation had clearly taken a toll on her. The neighbours helped us inside, Mrs. Johnson putting on the kettle for tea, while Mr. Abernathy carried Eleanor's bag to the living room. "Don't you worry about a thing," Mrs. Johnson said as she prepared cups. "The whole neighbourhood knows what wonderful people you and Robert are. No one will believe any nonsense she tries to spread." Their support was touching, but couldn't erase the reality of what had just happened, or what was likely coming next. After they left, promising to check on us tomorrow, I sat with Eleanor in the quiet living room, both of us emotionally exhausted. "I should have seen this coming," I said. The signs were all there: her increasing interest in Robert's assets, the pointed questions about the will. Eleanor nodded sadly. Robert saw it clearly. That's why he took the actions he did. The next few days brought a flurry of hostile communications. Texts from Natalie alternated between angry accusations and tearful pleas to make things right. William called repeatedly, his smooth banker's voice suggesting we come to a reasonable arrangement before things get unpleasant. Their attorney sent a formal letter suggesting we consider mediation to avoid prolonged legal proceedings. I consulted with Michael, who remained calmly confident. "Robert anticipated every move they're making," he assured me. "The will is ironclad. The video testimony, the medical certification of his competence, the clear explanation of his reasoning, it's all legally solid." "But they're threatening to contest it anyway," I pointed out. "At which point the penalty clause kicks in, reducing Natalie's inheritance to $1, he replied. "They know this. It's a bluff." Nevertheless, the emotional toll was significant. I found myself jumping whenever the phone rang, dreading another confrontation. Eleanor urged me to change the locks after she spotted Natalie driving by the house multiple times, but I couldn't bring myself to take such a definitive step against my own daughter. The letter Robert had given Michael for me remained unopened on my bedside table. Each night I would touch the envelope, gathering courage, but something held me back. Perhaps fear that his final words would somehow make this situation even more painful. Unexpected support came from many directions. Robert's business associates reached out with offers of assistance. The foundation director assured me they would handle all operational matters until I felt ready to be involved. Former neighbours, friends from church, my old nursing colleagues, all rallied around with calls, visits, and practical help. A week after the will reading, a formal legal notice arrived. Despite the penalty clause and against their attorney's reported advice, Natalie and William were officially contesting the will, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. The document was filled with hurtful allegations that I had isolated Robert during his illness, that I had manipulated his medication to keep him confused, that I had poisoned him against Natalie with malicious falsehoods. Reading these accusations from my own daughter broke something in me that had been barely holding together since Robert's death. I collapsed at the kitchen table, sobbing uncontrollably as Eleanor held my shoulders. "How did it come to this?" I wept. "Where did we go wrong with her?" Eleanor had no easy answers, only the wisdom of her years. "Some people just lose their way, Lydia. The allure of wealth and status can be powerful, and sometimes it takes losing everything to find your way back to what matters." "But what if she never finds her way back?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "What if this is the end of our relationship forever?" "That would be a tragic loss," Eleanor said gently. "But you must protect yourself now. Robert wanted to shield you from exactly this situation, a daughter who values money over family bonds." That evening, I finally found the strength to open Robert's letter. His handwriting, shakier than it once had been, but still familiar, filled several pages. "My dearest Lydia," it began. "If you're reading this, then the will has been read, and you're likely dealing with the fallout from Natalie. I'm so sorry to leave this burden to you, but I trust your strength and wisdom to handle what comes next. My decision to leave the estate to you wasn't made lightly or hastily. For years, I've watched our daughter change, becoming someone whose values are increasingly alien to what we tried to teach her. The final confirmation came during my illness, when I overheard her and William discussing the investment potential of our home while I was supposedly resting. You might be tempted to give in to her demands for peace's sake. Please don't. Not because I want to punish Natalie from beyond the grave, but because enabling her materialism won't help her find happiness or meaning. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to let them face the consequences of their choices. Whatever happens, remember that you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Our life together was rich in all the ways that truly matter. Take care of my mother, take care of yourself, and know that I am with you always in spirit. All my love, Robert. His words gave me the clarity and resolve I needed. The next morning I called Michael and asked him to proceed with a robust legal defense against Natalie's claims. As painful as it was, I would honor Robert's wishes and protect what he had entrusted to me, not just his assets, but his values and legacy. The following weeks brought intense preparation for what was shaping up to be a bitter legal battle. Michael assembled a team specializing in estate litigation, while I gathered documentation of Robert's mental clarity during his final months. Journal entries, business emails he had dictated to me, recordings of family gatherings where his faculties were evident. Eleanor contributed her own written statement, describing Robert's consistent lucidity and deliberate planning. Even in his final weeks, she wrote, "My son was methodical and thoughtful in his decisions. The changes to his will reflected his values, not any outside influence." Michael was confident in our position, but warned me to prepare for aggressive tactics. "Contested wills often get ugly," he explained during a strategy meeting. "They may try to depose friends, neighbors, even Robert's medical team looking for any evidence to support their claims." "Will they try to depose me?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady, despite the strain evident in her face. "They might," Michael acknowledged. "But your age and health give us grounds to limit any questioning. And frankly, you'd be a terrible witness for their side. Your clarity about Robert's intentions undermines their entire case." 3 days before our first scheduled court appearance, Michael called with unexpected news. "The court has granted our request to admit Robert's therapy recordings as evidence." I was surprised. "I didn't know Robert was seeing a therapist." "He started shortly after his diagnosis," Michael explained. "Dr. Sarah Reynolds. He signed a release allowing her to share their sessions posthumously if needed to validate his will. It's unusual, but incredibly valuable evidence." The revelation that Robert had sought therapy without telling me was momentarily jarring, but it made sense. He had always been private about processing difficult emotions, preferring to work through things before discussing them with me. That he had planned even this detail to protect his final wishes was testament to how deeply he had considered his decisions. On the morning of the court hearing, Eleanor insisted on accompanying me, despite my concerns about the stress it might cause her. "I've lived through the Great Depression, 2 wars, and losing both my husband and son," she reminded me. "I can certainly handle a courtroom." The county courthouse was an imposing granite building in downtown Boston. As we climbed the steps, I noticed several reporters with cameras. Apparently, the contested will of a successful businessman involving family drama had news value. I kept my head down, guiding Eleanor carefully up the stairs, while Michael ran interference with the press. Inside the courtroom was already buzzing with activity. Natalie and William sat at a table with their attorney heads bent in conversation. She was immaculately dressed in a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back severely, the picture of a grieving daughter wronged by a manipulative stepmother, rather than the furious woman who had confronted me on our lawn. When she noticed our arrival, her expression hardened momentarily, before she composed herself again, leaning over to whisper something to William. Their attorney, Gregory Phillips, nodded to Michael with professional courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. Judge Martha Harrington, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the court to order promptly. After preliminaries establishing the nature of the case, Phillips presented their opening argument, painting a heart-wrenching picture of a devoted daughter denied her rightful inheritance by a manipulative second wife who had isolated her dying husband from family. Robert Thompson was not of sound mind when he made these drastic changes to his will, Phillips argued smoothly. Under the influence of pain medication and facing his mortality, he was susceptible to suggestion from those with constant access to him, namely his wife Lydia Thompson. He went on to claim that I had systematically limited Natalie's access to her father during his illness, filtered his communications, and fed him false information about Natalie's intentions regarding family property. With each accusation, I felt Eleanor's hand tighten on mine, her silent support keeping me from reacting visibly to the painful mischaracterizations. When Michael rose for our response, his approach was measured and methodical. Rather than attacking Natalie's character, he focused on establishing Robert's mental competence and deliberate intentions. Your Honour, Robert Thompson was not only of sound mind when he revised his will 6 months before his death, but he anticipated exactly this challenge from his daughter. Rather than making a hasty decision during his final days, Mr. Thompson engaged in careful, documented planning to ensure his wishes would be respected. He introduced the video testimony Robert had recorded, which the judge viewed with careful attention. She occasionally glanced at Natalie during Robert's more pointed comments about her materialism, observing her reactions. After the video, Michael called Robert's primary physician, Dr. Alan Michaels, who testified unequivocally about Robert's mental clarity. Mr. Thompson remained cognitively sharp until the very end, he stated. His physical condition deteriorated, but his mind remained intact. He frequently discussed business matters with me, demonstrating complete awareness of complex issues. When questioned about Robert's pain medication, Dr. Michaels was equally clear. The medication regimen was carefully managed to control pain without clouding cognition. Mr. Thompson specifically requested this balance, stating he needed to finish important business. The court recessed for lunch after the doctor's testimony. In the hallway, I came face to face with Natalie as we both headed toward the restrooms. For a moment, we stood frozen, the gulf between us seeming wider than ever. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice low and intense. "You turned him against me. You never wanted me to have what was rightfully mine." The accusation stung, but I maintained my composure. "Your father made his own decisions, Natalie. He loved you, but he was disappointed in the values you've embraced." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Values? You mean success, financial security, things you and Dad were too afraid to reach for, so you hid behind this facade of moral superiority. Is that what you think?" I asked, genuinely surprised by her perspective. "That our choices were based on fear rather than principle. Your father built a successful business without ever compromising his ethics or treating people as means to an end. That was his definition of success." "Save the lecture," she replied bitterly. "This isn't over. When people hear how you isolated Dad, controlled his medication, fed him lies about me and William, none of that happened and you know it." I interrupted, my patience finally fraying. "Your father saw exactly who you've become. No one had to tell him anything." A court officer approached, ending our exchange. As we returned to the courtroom, I noticed William deep in conversation with their attorney, his expression concerned. Something had shifted during the lunch break. When proceedings resumed, Michael called his surprise witness, Dr. Sarah Reynolds, Robert's therapist. A poised woman in her 50s, she explained that Robert had begun therapy shortly after his diagnosis to process his emotions about his illness, his family relationships, and his legacy. Mr. Thompson gave written permission to share our sessions if they became relevant to validating his final wishes, she explained. He was particularly concerned that his daughter might challenge his will, claiming diminished capacity or undue influence. With the judge's permission, Dr. Reynolds played excerpts from their recorded sessions. Robert's voice filled the courtroom, clear and thoughtful, as he discussed his concerns about Natalie's materialism, her relationship with William, and his deliberate estate planning decisions. "I've been watching Natalie change for years," he said, in one recording dated 4 months before his death. The final straw was overhearing her and William discussing selling our family home while I was still alive, talking about my property as if I were already gone. That's when I knew I needed to protect Lydia and my mother from what would happen after my death. In another session, he specifically addressed potential claims of undue influence. Lydia has no idea I'm making these changes. She's too kind-hearted. She'd probably try to talk me into being fair to Natalie, giving her half of everything despite her behavior. But that wouldn't be truly fair to anyone, especially not to the values I've tried to live by. As the recordings played, I watched Natalie's face. The colour had drained from her cheeks, and she sat rigidly in her chair, avoiding eye contact with everyone. William was frantically writing notes to their attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. When court recessed for the day, the momentum had clearly shifted in our favour. In the hallway, I overheard William hissing at Phillips. "You said they wouldn't have this kind of evidence. This is a disaster." The next morning brought another unexpected development. Michael received a call from Phillips requesting a private meeting before court resumed. In a small conference room, William and their attorney proposed a settlement. "Mrs. Thompson," Phillips began carefully, "my clients would like to resolve this matter amicably, avoiding further family discord and public exposure." "By amicably, you mean they'll drop the contest if I give Natalie a larger share of the estate," I clarified. William leaned forward. "We're being reasonable here. The $25,000 bequest was clearly meant to be hurtful. We're simply asking for a fair division that acknowledges Natalie's position as Robert's only child." I noticed that Natalie herself was absent from this negotiation. "Where is my daughter? Shouldn't she be part of this discussion?" William and Phillips exchanged glances. "Natalie is taking some time to compose herself after yesterday's testimony," William explained. "She's authorized us to negotiate on her behalf." Michael intervened before I could respond. "My client needs time to consider any proposal. Please submit your terms in writing and we'll review them." As we left the meeting, Michael murmured, "Something's off. They're getting desperate." His instincts proved correct. When court resumed, Michael asked the judge's permission to present new evidence that had come to light. With approval granted, he introduced financial records showing that William's hedge fund was under investigation for irregularities, with investors withdrawing in droves. They were facing potential bankruptcy, explaining their urgent need for Natalie's inheritance. Even more damaging were emails between Natalie and William from the months before Robert's death, discussing plans for using her expected inheritance. One exchange explicitly mentioned moving the old lady to a care facility and finally selling that outdated house. The evidence had been provided anonymously to Michael's office that morning, sent, we would later discover, by a former employee of William's firm who had been troubled by their ethical violations and had access to their communications. Judge Harrington's expression grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the documents. When she looked up, her gaze fixed on Natalie, who seemed to physically shrink in her seat. "In light of this evidence," the judge announced, "I'm prepared to rule on this matter without further testimony. It is the finding of this court that Robert Thompson was of sound mind when executing his will, acted without undue influence, and made his wishes abundantly clear." She continued, her voice carrying quiet authority. "The will shall be upheld in its entirety, including the penalty clause. As Mrs. Crawford has contested the will, despite clear warning, her inheritance is hereby reduced to $1, in accordance with her father's explicitly stated wishes." Natalie let out a small, choked sound. Beside her, William had already turned to Phillips, his attention clearly on damage control rather than supporting his wife. "This case is dismissed," Judge Harrington concluded, "and I would suggest, Mrs. Crawford, that you take some time to reflect on the values your father tried to instill. The court thanks all parties for their time." As the judge departed, Natalie collapsed in tears. William, already on his phone, moved away from her without offering comfort. Their attorney began packing his briefcase, his manner suggesting their professional relationship was likely concluded. I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness. We had won legally, but the family had lost something irreplaceable. As Eleanor and I prepared to leave, I hesitated, looking back at my daughter sitting alone, abandoned even by her husband in her moment of defeat. For a moment I considered going to her, offering some comfort despite everything. But Michael gently guided me toward the door. "Give her space, Lydia. This isn't the time. She needs to process what's happened." He was right, of course. Whatever healing might be possible between Natalie and me would take time and would need to begin on different terms than these. For now, I would return home with Eleanor, honor Robert's wishes, and hope that someday my daughter might understand the true inheritance her father had tried to leave her, not money or property, but values that would sustain her through life's challenges. 6 months after the court hearing, I sat in the sunroom of our home sorting through photographs for an album commemorating the newly expanded scholarship program of Robert's Foundation. Under my guidance, the foundation had increased its support for nursing students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds or pursuing geriatric specialties, a tribute to the care that had meant so much to Robert and Eleanor. Eleanor, now approaching her 85th birthday, had experienced some health setbacks since Robert's death. Her heart condition required additional medication, and her arthritis had worsened, making the stairs in our home increasingly difficult. Despite these challenges, she maintained her sharp mind and gentle wisdom, becoming my closest companion as we navigated life without Robert. The months since the court case had brought many changes. I had grown more comfortable with my role managing Robert's estate, working closely with his trusted business partners to ensure his company continued to operate according to his ethical standards. The initial awkwardness of being the boss had gradually given way to mutual respect and collaboration. Our home remained exactly as Robert had wanted, a sanctuary for Eleanor and me filled with memories and comfort. I had made some minor modifications to accommodate Eleanor's mobility issues, including converting the downstairs study into a bedroom so she wouldn't need to climb stairs. Of Natalie, we had heard little. After the court case, she and William had retreated from contact. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that William's financial troubles had worsened, resulting in investigations by regulatory authorities. The expensive home they had purchased just 2 years earlier was now on the market. I was sorting through a stack of recent foundation photographs when my phone chimed with an email notification. The name in my inbox stopped me cold: Natalie Crawford. It was the first direct communication from my daughter in 6 months. The message was brief. "Mom, William left. Can we talk? Natalie." My hands trembled slightly as I reread the 6 words several times. Behind their simplicity lay a world of potential meanings. Was this a genuine olive branch, or another attempt to access Robert's money now that William was gone? When I shared the email with Eleanor, she considered it thoughtfully. "People rarely change until they have to," she said. Perhaps losing everything, husband, inheritance, security, has given her the push she needed. Or perhaps she's desperate and sees me as her last resort, I countered, wary after all that had happened. "That's possible too," Eleanor acknowledged. "But even desperation can be the beginning of wisdom. The question is whether you're ready to find out which it is." After careful consideration, I replied with equal brevity. "Natalie, I'm sorry to hear about William. Yes, we can talk. Coffee at Riverside Cafe Thursday at 2 p.m. Mum." A neutral location seemed prudent for our first meeting, public enough to discourage extreme emotions, but quiet enough for a meaningful conversation. Thursday arrived with a mix of spring sunshine and cool breezes. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, choosing a table by the window with a view of the river. The familiar setting, where Robert and I had often enjoyed Sunday brunch, provided some comfort as my anxiety about seeing Natalie increased with each passing minute. At precisely 2 o'clock, the cafe door opened. I almost didn't recognize my daughter at first. Gone was the polished, designer-clad woman who had appeared in court. This Natalie wore minimal makeup, simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. The changes weren't just superficial. She moved differently without the confident stride that had become her trademark. She scanned the cafe anxiously until our eyes met. "Mom," she said softly as she approached the table. No air kisses this time, just an awkward half movement, as if unsure whether to attempt a hug. "Natalie," I replied, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. Would you like some coffee? Small talk carried us through the ordering process, comments about the unseasonably warm weather, the cafe's renovation since she had last visited. When our drinks arrived, an uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Natalie took a deep breath. I don't know where to start. Maybe with William, I suggested gently. She nodded, staring into her coffee. He left 3 weeks ago. The fund collapsed completely. There's an ongoing investigation, securities fraud, misrepresentation to investors. He knew it was coming. That's why he was so desperate for Dad's money. The pieces clicked into place. William's aggressive pursuit of the inheritance, his quick abandonment of Natalie after the court case. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it despite everything. No one deserved such betrayal. Don't be, she replied with unexpected bitterness. It's what I deserved. I chose him for all the wrong reasons. Status, connections, lifestyle. I ignored the red flags because I was so enamored with the world he represented. She looked up at me directly for the first time. The house is gone. The cars, the vacation property, everything. I'm staying with a former colleague who was kind enough to offer her guest room. Most of my so-called friends disappeared along with the money. What will you do now? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral rather than offering immediate solutions. I've found a job, she said, a hint of pride breaking through the dejection. Nothing fancy. Administrative assistant at a non-profit. It barely covers my student loans and basic expenses, but it's honest work. The change in her circumstances was dramatic, but what struck me more was her attitude. A humility I hadn't seen in years, tinged with what seemed like genuine self-reflection. Dad was right about me, she continued, her voice catching. Everything he said in that video about how I lost my way about values. He saw it all clearly. I was so angry when I heard those words. But he was right. Tears welled in her eyes. The worst part is that I never got to tell him. I never got to say I'm sorry or try to be better while he was still here. My own eyes filled with tears. This was the daughter I remembered, the one who had been buried beneath years of materialism and status-seeking. Your father never stopped loving you, Natalie. He was disappointed in your choices, but he never gave up hope that you would find your way back to what truly matters. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. Is Grandma okay? I've been so awful to her too. She's doing reasonably well considering her age and Robert's loss. She asks about you sometimes. Natalie nodded, seeming to gather courage for what came next. I'm not here to ask for money, Mum. I want to be clear about that. I know what you must be thinking, and I wouldn't blame you. But that's not why I reached out. Why did you then? I asked. Because I have nothing left except the people I've hurt, she replied simply. And I'm trying to figure out if there's any way to rebuild those relationships. If it's too late, I'll understand. But I had to try. We talked for nearly 2 hours, moving well beyond the superficial to the core issues that had driven us apart. Natalie spoke of her insecurities, her fear of not measuring up to Robert's success, her gradual surrender to materialistic values as a way of proving her worth. I shared my perspective on those same years, my worry as I watched her change, my failed attempts to reconnect my own mistakes, in sometimes enabling her behavior to keep the peace. It wasn't an instant reconciliation. Too much had happened, too many harsh words exchanged for that kind of fairy tale ending. But it was a beginning. Tentative, fragile, but real. As we prepared to leave, Natalie asked hesitantly, Do you think... Would it be possible to see Grandma sometime? I understand if she doesn't want to see me. Why don't you come for dinner next week? I suggested. Nothing formal, just the 3 of us. Eleanor would like that, I think. Her smile, genuine without the polished veneer I'd grown accustomed to, reminded me so much of her childhood self that my heart ached with the years we had lost. The dinner the following week was awkward but meaningful. Eleanor, ever wise, treated Natalie neither with suspicion nor with immediate forgiveness, but with the measured warmth of someone willing to rebuild trust gradually. They spoke of Robert sharing memories that celebrated his life, rather than focusing on the painful final chapter. Before Natalie left that evening, I remembered something. "Wait here a moment," I told her, going to Robert's study. I returned with an envelope slightly worn from being carried in Robert's jacket pocket during his final months. "Your father wrote this for you," I explained. "He asked me to give it to you if you ever found your way back to us." Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. "He thought I might come back." "He hoped," I corrected gently. "Hope was one of your father's most enduring qualities." She didn't open the letter there, choosing instead to save it for a private moment. I respected her decision, knowing that Robert's final words to her deserved the space for whatever emotional response they might bring. Over the next 3 months, Natalie became a more regular presence in our lives. Sunday dinners became a tradition. She volunteered to help Eleanor organize her library, spending quiet afternoons sorting books while listening to her grandmother's stories. Small steps, building bridges across the chasm that had developed over years. When Eleanor's health took a concerning turn in the fall, Natalie began visiting more frequently, sometimes coming directly from work, to spend evenings helping with medication management or simply providing company. She revealed that she had begun taking night classes in healthcare administration, inspired partly by her time helping care for Eleanor. "I want to do something meaningful," she explained. "Something that helps people like you did as a nurse mum." For Eleanor's 85th birthday, we organized a small celebration at home. Natalie arrived early to help with preparations, bringing a cake she had baked herself, not store-bought or professionally catered, as would have been her style before, but made with her own hands, imperfect but heartfelt. During the small gathering, Eleanor pulled me aside while Natalie was serving coffee to the few close friends we had invited. "Robert would be so proud," she whispered. "Not just of you, but of her too. She's finding her way back." 2 weeks later, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. The loss hit me hard. She had been my connection to Robert, my daily companion, my support through the most difficult year of my life. But I found unexpected strength in Natalie's presence as we planned the memorial service together and sorted through Eleanor's belongings, each choosing meaningful keepsakes to remember her by. At Eleanor's service, Natalie stood beside me, her hand occasionally finding mine during particularly emotional moments. She had helped create a beautiful photo display of Eleanor's life, including many images with Robert, that brought both tears and smiles from attendees. When several people approached to express condolences, Natalie introduced herself simply as Eleanor's granddaughter, not the formal distance of my father's mother she would have used a year earlier, but an acknowledgement of a direct, loving relationship. On the 1-year anniversary of Robert's death, Natalie suggested we visit the cemetery together. We stood in comfortable silence at his grave, each lost in our own memories and reflections. "I've been thinking about Dad's foundation," Natalie said as we walked back to the car. "The scholarship program you've expanded. I'd like to help if you'd let me. Maybe start by volunteering at some events, learning more about how it works." I studied her face, seeing genuine interest rather than calculated positioning. "I think that would be wonderful. The annual fundraiser is next month. It would be a perfect place to start." By the time spring returned, bringing the first anniversary of our court confrontation, the landscape of our relationship had transformed entirely. Natalie had proven her commitment through consistent presence and genuine effort, not just with me, but with Robert's legacy through the foundation. She had moved into a modest apartment, lived within her means, and continued her education. The materialism that had defined her adult life seemed to have loosened its grip, replaced by a growing appreciation for what Robert had always valued: integrity, purpose, and human connection. One evening, as we finished dinner at my home, now just mine since Eleanor's passing, Natalie helped clear the table, a domestic rhythm we had established in our new relationship. "I've been offered a position with the hospital system," she said.